Hello and welcome to my workshop. I'm Nigel Armitage and I am the owner of Armitage Leather. And I am, for want of a better description, a bespoke leather worker. And to explain what that means is I make leather goods by hand to order here in the workshop. So my journey started 34 years ago. I wanted a knife sheath making and I went into a saddler and asked him if he could make it, and I came up with a design. He took a bunch of measurements, and it's a longer story, but I'm going to shorten it to the point that he didn't make it. It never happened, and ultimately I walked out of that saddler's with enough leather to make it myself. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no tools. I had no understanding of the techniques that were required, but I had a go. I succeeded. Poorly. It wasn't a fantastic item, but it was functional. It worked. And that moment of actually fashioning a material I'd never worked before into a serviceable, useful item was a huge revelation for me. I had no idea at that point that I would have called myself creative. I didn't know I had a creative side, but that woke up. And that started my journey. I began going to jumble sales and second-hand shops and finding old leather items, old chairs, bags, taking them apart and refashioning them. Still not really knowing what I was doing, but thoroughly enjoying the journey. I then managed to get some direction and ended up at Walsall School of Saddlery, and formally learning how to do what I wanted to do. Cutting leather, stitching it, working to patterns and designs and templates and fashioning items properly. I then became independent and began making things as a bespoke maker after, and that's where I am today. I'm still doing that today. And I make things that a customer will walk in and say, well, I want a bag, and we'll talk about a purpose for that bag or the style or the size. We'll design it together and I'll make it for them. That then has developed into me teaching other people to do the same. And I teach people one-to-one here in the workshop. I also have an online channel, Secrets from the Workshop, where people can go and learn remotely. So if people out in America or Brazil or Japan want to learn, they can log onto the channel and have a look there. I am a bespoke maker, which is a very, very small part in the big leatherworking family. So I make things by hand. I will design, cut, stitch, dress and finish everything completely without the assistance of a machine. Everything is hand stitched, all the holes are made by hand. And here we have an example of some work being undertaken by hand. And evidently there is no machine present. Today, the leatherworking industry is massive. You have cordwainers, shoemakers. You can make shoes by machine, but there are still companies here in the UK making shoes by hand. It's a wonderful trade, beautiful skill to learn. There are upholsterers. Again, upholsterers will use a lot of machinery, but there are upholsterers on a much smaller scale that are making and repairing furniture to a very high standard, and some very old furniture, some beautiful work being done by those. It's still under the leatherworking umbrella. You have people that will make speedboat covers. There's a huge marine leatherworking industry that cover very much like the upholstery and the automotive industry, but they're using different leathers because of the salt water. There's a massive range, and obviously people want boots, shoes, bags, belts. There's a big demand for it. So how we make it is very much dependent on whether we decide to go for machinery or handmade. I'm a bespoke maker, which covers the umbrella of making items to order by hand. So I'm not an industrial leather worker. I'm very much on a smaller scale. The other side of this coin are the craft workers. Independent leather workers who are making a living from making leather goods by hand. And that's, I suppose, where I fit with the teaching. I teach people who are either other teachers or are looking to start up their own business and becoming bespoke makers themselves. I've had a young lady come to me who had designs for handbags. She spent her time at university becoming a designer. She then came and spent time with me learning how to produce those items by hand. She now produces items for the BBC. There's another young lady that works in Texas who came over and spent 3 weeks with me. She now produces things for television, for HBO out there. There are other people that have spent time with courses here and gone on to become professional leather workers for larger companies producing leather goods. Some by hand, some with machine. There's a massive range. It's very, very broad. And you can find something that you're passionate about. Find a subject that appeals to you, and the likelihood is there's a leather aspect to it. So if your thing is cars, then you have the automotive aspect of the leather work. If you are a massive dog lover, then there's a whole plethora of accessories for dogs, of collars, of harnesses, of leads, of bags. It goes on. It is genuinely huge. If you're into being in the outdoors, there are satchels and foraging bags, rucksacks, belts, sheaths, pouches. You can find a subject and you will find a purpose for it. There was once an apprenticeship specifically for apron makers. Leather apron makers was a very prestigious role. And you had coopers and blacksmiths and welders that had these leather aprons. Well, today they're coming back because they are very, very durable, very robust. They do the job very well and look fantastic. But where do you buy one? They're asking people to make them. So if you find something that you're drawn towards, you tend to find there's a leather avenue near to it that you can explore. It doesn't have to be industry-led. Here in the UK, there's a massive following of the Wild West. Cowboys. Huge towns here in the UK where people gather and become cowboys for the weekend. Holsters, fast draw rigs, hat bands, boots, whips. There's a massive demand for them. And all you have to do is look and you will see. And this is the difficulty that I had when I started. I didn't know this world existed. I didn't know how broad leatherwork went. Reenactors. You look at people who are Vikings or Romans or from the Middle Ages, or whatever period, the Napoleonic Wars. You look at a Napoleonic soldier, how much leather they actually carried. You look at a Viking, how much leather they wore. An awful lot of the armour worn by Romans was leather, unless of course you went up and you got the steel. But it's huge, and there are people that follow this and look for these products. So if you have an interest or if you have a leaning towards a subject, you tend to find there is something behind it that is leather related, and there's a demand for it. And that's wonderful, because that's pushing leatherwork back to the top again. It's not as popular on TV or in the media, but it's there. If you look for it, you will find it, but it won't just fall in your lap. So if you have an idea, you develop it, you nurture it, you work with somebody to help you find avenues, you will find a path. And you just need imagination. There is no typical day here in the workshop. Every day's very slightly different, but it depends entirely what I'm doing. So I could be writing. I write books. I'm an author as well about leatherwork. I produce videos for online lessons. I teach other students here in the workshop, and I make items. So I'll talk you through a typical day of making. I will come in the morning. if I'm starting a project, the first thing that I will do is produce a set of templates. I will have a criteria to follow. What size, what length, what materials I'm going to use. I will have a look at the design around what a customer has asked for. I then produce a template that I can work to. I can take these measurements and dimensions to the leather to assist with cutting and marking. But this will give me a test of my dimensions. Will what I'm after doing work? And the template will give me that. I will then begin to mark the leather for any holes that are required for the stitching, for any furniture or hardware, at which point then the leather would be dressed, and this protects the edge of the leather, makes it look nice and finished, and at which point then I would begin to stitch it together. Now, some items are more complicated to stitch together than others, and this one has quite a few multiple parts, so it has to be done in a certain order. So having a catalogue of this before we start is a very, very good idea. And this order of process tends to come out early at the template making stage, which is why template making is so important. And here we get an idea of what the finished product looks like. Another day might include teaching, either a single student or groups here in the workshop, or me travelling to them. I fly over to America a lot and teach out there. I'm looking at flying to Denmark and Japan and potentially Australia to teach there as well. So I get a lovely opportunity to mix with different cultures, different people with different experiences and levels, and share my style of leatherwork. I also teach people remotely on Zoom, so they will come into a conference and we will talk through any issues or problems that they have, and that's very enlightening, very rewarding. So there's a lot of interaction with lots of other leather workers, and from every interaction that I have, I get something from it as well. It's sharing, it's developing my passion and interests, and it also pushed my boundaries as well, because people will ask me questions that I have to think about. Well, can you do this? And I'm going to give consideration. And even 34 years later, it's still exciting. Somebody will ask you a question. Can that be done? I don't know. Let's find out. And there's a lot of fun to be had. And like I mentioned earlier, all you need is imagination. If you can think it, there's a good chance you can probably make it. There's a huge selection of things that could be made from leather. I've seen people making aeroplanes, covering cars, motorcycles. There's not just the industrial aspect, there's not just the making aspect, there's a whole artistic side to it as well. Clothing. How much leather clothing is out there? And the amount of people that are being incredibly artistic with their clothing. There's a young lady that came to me from Birmingham University that had studied fashion design, and all of the items that she made were from offcuts that otherwise would be thrown away in leather, and she made something fashionable, usable and beautiful from it, just with her imagination. Honestly, it's such a huge subject. It's massive. When you start, you are very much going down the rabbit hole, and it's a lot of fun when you get there. I hope that helps. Thank you.